There it is. I think
There
we're
it
live.
is.
On. This is our very first video cast, and I'm so excited. People are going to finally receive the confirmation that, yeah, Scott is as unattractive as I thought he would be on camera.
No, we won't win any kind of podcast prizes
Yeah.
for our looks.
I'd say everyone
That's
give us a chance. John, welcome, buddy. We
right
were
on.
we were just talking about it. I'm noticing your beautiful room, and with all your collections of Pez dispensers
Mm-hmm.
and everything,
Yeah.
and my room here is very apropos because this is where they filmed the solitary confinement for Shawshank Redemption, which we're going to be talking about. So, everyone, welcome to Steph Nation. This is our very first video cast. If you're on Spotify, right? But if you're on Apple or Amazon or whatever, you're still just going to get the audio. So if our faces are just too much for you, you can always go to other platforms. But for those of us just want to see, like, hey, Scott, your double chin's growing daily. What's going on? We have a separate website about my second chin.
Oh, come on, man. You're all right, buddy.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
right. You're all
well,
right.
listen, here tonight, we're talking about Shawshank Redemption. And let me just set the scene, John. And I think everyone's gone through this. It's a Saturday afternoon. You're somewhat hungover, not too bad. You had a lot of pizza the night before and cheap beer, and you're going to go to the gym. You're motivated. You got everything. You just glance at the TV as you're about to leave, and you notice Shawshank Redemption is on. Whether it's the first minute or it's got 5 minutes left, you're staying throughout the whole thing. And you've seen it 20 times.
Yeah.
That is the scenario.
Yeah.
And
it definitely, once you're in, you're in.
This is quite an interesting phenomenon. And I talked to John as we were going through research topics and new topics for Steph Nation. And I said, hey, Shawshank Redemption, it's the #1 rated movie of all time. Well, by the IMDb, which is known in many circles as the source for the ranking of global movies. And John, I think you didn't believe it at first.
No, I mean, you think of like the greatest films of all time and films like Gone with the Wind and Citizen Kane and The Maltese Falcon. I mean, you think of all these classic films that usually rank in the top films of all time. So when you told me that Shawshank Redemption was #1 on IMDb, yeah, I was shocked by that. I really was. Not that I didn't think it was worthy of a ranking, but overall, I was shocked until I went and did some research, and then it began to make sense.
It's unbelievable. And I was talking to John about why I thought this movie was so important that we need to do a whole episode on it. But as you know, I've had a nomadic life. I think the U.S. didn't accept me, so I had to go to other countries. And all the girlfriends that eventually dumped me, our first dates always had that iconic, what's your favorite movie? And this is in different languages, all right? I was in Japan, and my Japanese is horrible at best, and her English was even worse. And we connected. I said, what's your favorite movie? Shawshank Redemption. And it's like, wow. I go to India, same thing. Around the world, I noticed over the past 20 some years, this movie just came up on all of their top lists. And we would talk about it, John. And I told you this is my favorite movie. It even beats Jaws, which I didn't think could be possible. And I think there's something to it. So, John, thanks for how do I say giving into my whims here and talking about Shawshank. But I think it's important enough not only as a global phenomenon, but like, what is it about this movie? And that's what we're talking about tonight. And let me just give you some facts. So I mentioned it's the #1 ranked movie. Okay, now this is the IMDb list. There's other lists out there, but I'd say most of them, John, this ranks in the top 3, not even top 5. So consistently, this is one I'd say generally known as one of the greatest movies of all time. Released in 1994, and with the director Frank Darabont, who actually did the screenplay for Nightmare on Elm Street and some other horror movies. So it wasn't a Spielberg, it wasn't a Friedkin or a Kubrick, right? This movie bombed when it came out in the theaters. And John, did you know the other movies that it was competing with?
Yeah, I remember some of the movies that it had out was I know Pulp Fiction came out at the same time, and as well as Forrest Gump around the same time as well.
That's right. It was nominated for Academy Awards, but didn't win the big categories. And subsequently was noted by the studios a failure. It only made, I think in its first 100 days, 16 million, where Pulp Fiction made 100 million, right? Which was a very kind of innovative film at the time with Tarantino. And then Forrest Gump goes over 300 million. So it was a loss for the studio. And there were many, how do I say, excuses. One, they said the title, and it was actually based on Stephen King's 1982 novel, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. That was such a long title, they abbreviated to another long title, The Shawshank Redemption. People found it confusing. And there was no female part in the entire movie. And it was a prison movie, which at the time they were going more towards action. And that's what they kind of said. That's why it was a disaster at first. And John, when did you first see this movie?
I didn't see it when it first came out either. I did not see it. And I had to go back and think. I did see it in the theater, but it was after it had gained a little bit of popularity. You said it kind of got a second wind, if you will, like a lot of films that come out and don't win an award, or they get nominated and they tend to get some traction. This was one of those where I remember seeing it in the theater, living in Chicago. I went and saw it. And it was because it had it had a great cast. I remember just like seeing the cast, it had Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, and had a lot of great character actors that were in it too, like William Sadler. So I remember going to see it, but it wasn't until later, much later after it had been released, I went and finally saw it because I heard from another friend of mine. He's like, "Hey, you got to go see this." I think I actually saw it months and months after it had already come out.
That's right. I never saw it in the theater. And I got to give credit to an old fraternity brother of mine, C. Smith, who is a movie buff. And this guy came in, and I was a senior in college, and he came in and he said, "Scott, I've seen the greatest movie ever." And I was like, "What is it?" And I didn't remember the title. I was like, and in fact, when they polled people, did kind of these, not store intercepts, people would leave the theater and they'd say, "What movie was it?" They're like, "The Shawshank Redemption." That was like what they said. Shawshank Redemption. That was it. Like the worst marketing ever. And I think it's so funny because, Forrest Gump is obviously a popular movie, and Pulp Fiction, right? It's one of the best. And but out of that, this one ranks even higher. Warner Brothers, who produced it and funded it, released over 300,000 VHS tapes of rentals, right? And they pound this movie. Everything was starting to be tracked, and they noticed there were repeat rentals. And they would show it on TCM. And it just kept growing and growing, and royalties. And it was this sleeper that went all the way. And then in 2009, right, this was launched in 1994, takes the top spot over A Godfather. Which is crazy. Which is unbelievable.
It is unbelievable, because I remember seeing this film when I had just moved back from New York. And I think it was actually early 95. And I just, I was really into like going to see films. I think I went to see it by myself too, if I remember correctly. And I remember going to see it in the theater, and then I got it. I understood why this film had the following, and I couldn't believe it didn't have the awards and the accolades, because I didn't really hear much about it, but just from some friends that, "Dude, you should go see this movie." and you probably need to get cheered up. You had a pretty rough time, so you need to go check this out. I remember that was really the reason why I went and saw it. I really knew the actors, but it did. Once I went and saw it for the first time in the theater, I can't believe it was still running, but I think it started to pick up momentum. So theaters were carrying it. And then I'm like, okay, now I get the shit. Now I know why it was so good. And that was it. And I was sold. I've probably seen this movie, I don't know. Good Lord.
Well, that's it.
It's 70 times. I don't even know how many times. Hundreds of times.
That's why I start off with this scenario. It's so many people are like, oh man, I just have to watch it if it's on, and it happens to be on a lot. So it's this self-fulfilling. What I like about it was there was no image marketing per se. This truly went through the ranks on its own merit. And it is what Spielberg called it. It has this stickiness factor because it's not a short movie. It's not 90 minutes, right?
No.
But the themes of friendship, of hope, obviously redemption, and the casting. I mean, I couldn't imagine this movie with like Keanu Reeves. Could you imagine? Like, be like, dude, this food, it's so. I just wanted some chimichangas.
You just got to keep on living, or Matthew McConaughey. Just got to keep on living, man. L-I-V-I-N.
Be like, whoa.
Yeah. It wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same.
And Morgan Freeman's voice. This is the voice when you die, right? And hopefully you go to heaven. This is the voice you would hear as you're entering.
His narration. His narration is just. I don't think there's a lot of people that are better than Morgan Freeman when it comes to narration. It's just so good.
Well, let's look into some of the themes here and what people say. Right, there's a lot about this. So there were many articles saying, why is this so beloved and globally? And I think it's, and let me kind of drop my own philosophy here, but I think this is what other people say too. It captures the human experience. And let me qualify that. This is, we're somehow born into this earth, whatever, and we do some bad shit, right? We're not happy about what we're doing. Which kind of what happened with the character that Tim played, Andy Dufresne. And you go through this prison. It's a metaphor. It could be your own prison. Whether it's physical or psychological or mental or whatever. And I think, it has, and they even said it has this like Christian mysticism where it's kind of death and resurrection. And I think that's why anyone, think about it, there's no female characters in this. It's a male prison, right? So why is it that in the rentals, they notice 50% of the rentals were females, right? And so that kind of got them thinking, oh my gosh, this movie is appealing to everyone. So I think it has something for everyone, and I think those human experiences or themes are different from like Godfather. So let me say Godfather, right? And it has ideas of betrayal and family and whatnot. There are some universal themes, but if you're not into kind of gangster flicks, I don't know. Listen, it is an amazing movie. I'm not saying Godfather is bad, but why do you think it's different from like a Godfather, or even a Pulp Fiction? Which, I mean, some people found Pulp Fiction kind of weird. Some of the older people, I'm old now, but back then I wasn't old. With this kind of non-linear narration and dialogue.
I think you touched on a lot of it, Scott. I think that it has this sort of classic themes to it. It's a movie with a lot of layers too. Right. I mean, I go back, I'm a classic film buff, as you know. So I go back to like the prison movies from the 30s and the 40s, films like Fugitive from a Chain Gang with Paul Muni. I think about Each Dawn I Die. Even, going to like 93 was A Fugitive with Harrison Ford. So there was a lot of, I've seen a lot of prison films. But this one was, I think from the films that were coming out that time, it just had this so many themes to it. And, every time I watch it, I tend to get something else out of it, right? Yeah. Depending on where I am in my life, the film takes on some different meanings. And I think that was maybe why this film was so important, because it had some like classic wholesome themes to it about, you mentioned friendship, even the love the love that was between Red and Andy, as like almost like brothers. And you see him get pushed down and get pulled back up again, the ups and downs, emotional highs and lows, the sadness, when Brooks kills himself in the movie, right? Because he can't live in the outside world. I mean, it takes you through emotional ups and downs that make movie going so much fun, right? It's just, that's why I love this film, because it is so layered with emotions, from being horrified and sad and angry to being at the end into certain scenes, being vilified by what's happening to Andy and how he overcomes all this. There's some funny parts in it as well.
Yeah.
Some very clever parts. So I think the public in general, when you watch this movie, if you like just watching films, Shawshank Redemption has something for everybody. And you're right. There's no women in it. There's no female roles. It's kind of like going back. I mean, that's rare, to think about a film.
Very rare. You think
you have to go back to like the 30s when you think about the women. There's a film, The Women, where there was no men in it. This film had no women, no female roles in it. But it had so much. I mean, the characters, the actors did such an amazing job, and Tim Robbins as Andy Dufresne. I can't imagine casting anyone quite like him in this film, because he did such a great job.
And they say, he had, I would say, Christ-like figure in it, but he was unaffected. When he first gets to the prison, he had this, and then how he was just kind of represented as this good soul, if you will, and had the dream. And I think what I've noticed when I talk to people in my travels or living abroad, most people, life can be hard. And it's a metaphor to the, like, I think a prison that people either build for themselves, or this kind of the how do I say it? The life can be have a great deal of pain that we don't see, and I think a lot of it is psychological. And I think that the idea of Mexico, right? Oh, it's Zihuatanejo, right? And him and Red talk about it. He's like, hey, when we get out, I think those themes, I think they stand the test of time. Where some movies that rank in this top 5, like Lord of the Rings, which it's more fantasy based. And hey, listen, I'm a huge Tolkien fan, but still doesn't resonate with.
Right.
But if you say a prison movie, people be like, yeah, I saw Escape from Alcatraz. Technically has similar things about a guy who wants to escape.
Sure.
But I found this one, it somehow just touched people very deeply on a variety, as you said, John, a variety of these things that everyone has: hope.
Yeah.
Friendship.
I mean, and I know there's actually a documentary about this film. I don't know if you've ever heard about it. It's called Shawshank: The Redeeming Feature, and it's a documentary about what we're talking about today, is why this movie is so good, and why people say that. There are people that say this movie saved my life. At some point in my life, I was at such a low where I just wanted to give up. And I watched this movie, and there's some great lines by the Andy's character about, keep on, I'm not going to quote it.
I'll say it. Want me to say it?
Go ahead, say it.
He goes, get busy living or get busy dying.
And that's it. I think a lot of people look at times in their lives when, music can do this, right, to people. Yeah. And films can do it, where you're at a certain point in your life where things aren't going so well. And those kind of films make a greater impact. When your things are going good in life and everything is happy, these films are still very good. Yeah. And you can still really enjoy them. But I find that people, when they're at points in their lives that are a little bit lower, these kinds of films can help give you a different outlook, and it can help energize you to not give up and get back out there. And when I was listening to these documentaries, and they were interviewing people that talk about how much this film meant to them, it's amazing. And then it makes me just when you first told me we were going to have this topic, I'm like, really? I don't understand. But I know you really like this movie. But then once I started looking more into it, and then I started going back and looking at some of the scenes from the film and doing some research. God, it's made total sense. I'm like, wow, this movie is powerful. I see why it's number one. And, it's such a great film. And I think it does a thing for everybody. And it does give a positive message to the whole thing. But it's just a fun as always, it's a fun film to watch. It's a great film to
Yeah,
watch.
and I think right when you almost feel like, oh wow, I've been watching this a long time, then they come in with the prison break scene, and it's so exhilarating.
Right.
You just and it keeps you going. It's like literally the perfectly paced movie, and I think that's why Spielberg said it had this stickiness factor.
Yeah,
and
sure.
as you said, but John, you're so right. These when I talk to colleagues in these different countries when I was working abroad, it was the one thing we could connect on, right? I'm living in these I didn't really speak the language that well, but yet they would get very emotional about this one movie. We could talk about The Godfather, right? Or we could talk about even Star Wars. Somehow this touched the soul, if you will, or like a deeper emotion. And I think it is that human experience that we all go through. And yet it was different from like a religious movie, like maybe Passion of the Christ or movies that kind of tend to touch on a religion.
Sure.
But it's very similar in this idea of death, hope, resurrection. And I think it is what it is. Like it's touched all these people. And I think it's worthy enough that, and even now, if you think about this, John, and I thought this was interesting, there's no special effects.
No.
And you think about the movies today that rely so heavily on CGI, it could be dated, if you will, if like certain movies, horror movies that are insanely scary at the time, and then kids are like, oh, this is goofy. Young people can watch Shawshank and get the same reaction.
Right. And the film doesn't take place in modern day either. It wasn't like a film that was released in 94, but it was a period piece, if you will, in some ways, because it was the time, I believe, was in the 40s when it was supposed to be, happening. And it kind of goes through a period of time that goes, as you see in Andy's posters, it evolves through time with the different pinup girls, right?
Yeah,
and so right. It's not like a story that was told in present day or even in future. It was a piece that, or a more of a period film, which it didn't hold it back at all. I mean, the message was still there. It didn't have any modern music, right? It was it was all more classic music. So it was great. I mean, that just shows the power of the script and of the actors and of the storytelling that made it that strong.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the other thing is there hasn't been a sequel. Although I got to admit, in our very infamous already, the sequels that need to happen. We had Andy drug dealing down in Mexico.
Right.
I don't know. Again, and that's why I was saying that we would crush so many people if we actually, got the money to fund and got the original cast.
Because the scene at the end, I was just talking to Carla about this movie before I joined on, and we were just talking about the film because as Carla and I talk about a lot of these films from the 30s and 40s, these prison films, they mainly were focused on the character that had actually committed a crime. And during that period of time, there was a code. So at the end of the movie, a lot of times, even the non-guilty people still, ended kind of abruptly, or it was a sad ending. In this movie, it was a very happy ending. I mean, you walked out of that theater, so happy that Red and Andy were meeting up on this beach, and the way it was shot from above, it was so good because it left you wanting more, but still kind of very, very satisfied.
And that was. In some of the analysis, they say that is the heaven, right? The hope. And there are some quotes in there, and he says, the Pacific is where you can forget, or where there's no memory, and that definitely had a kind of this heaven. No matter what you did, how freaking horrible you were on this earth, when you get to heaven, it's all forgiven. It's a fresh start.
Yeah.
And
is there one scene, Scott, that you liked in this movie? Is there a favorite scene when you think about this film? Because what was your favorite part of Shawshank? Do you have one that stands out?
I think for me, it was when he first gets there and Red is talking about him. And he's saying he looks like a stuck-up banker, and then he says, that night there was a beating, right, of one of the new prisoners. It's their first
Right.
night in, and he says
Yeah.
usually, and all the Red and his crew, all the guys are taking bets on who's going to break right that night.
Yeah.
And Red put his money on him, and he
On
said
him.
he didn't say it. He didn't hear a word,
Right.
and somehow that just really captured me. That's my favorite. The dialogue, obviously, the "get busy living" or "get busy dying" is um, is so amazing. When I think I was telling you, I went on this year-long documentary tour in Africa and in China and all that, and I gave the speech at the very end of this long trip, right? This show, if you will, and I used that quote. And there were people from all different nationalities and whatnot, but everyone got it. That's what I was like, oh, what am I going to say to these people? I'm going to do it. But they knew that much. They knew that much English, especially the Japanese. They didn't know a lot of English, but they knew that phrase. Yeah. And everyone, it's like it was a rallying call. And so it's a very special movie. What about yourself? What part grabbed you?
There's a lot. I think my favorite scene, because it just, the way it was shot and art directed, was a scene where Andy is in the office and he locks himself in and he grabs the record. And I forgot if it was Madame Butterfly that he put on.
It's a Mozart. Well, no, it's Italian, right?
Okay, whatever it was. Again, I'm not a professional film critic, so I forgot what it is. But he puts that on, he locks the door, and he cranks it up and puts the microphone next to the record player, and it puts the music out into the prison yard, and everybody stops. Right? I mean, these people have never probably heard classic music before, and Morgan Freeman does this great narration over the top, and he talks about, I don't know what that Italian lady was saying. But that was Andy kind of sitting back in his chair and just kind of smiling, knowing he's going to be in big trouble, but gives this sort of gift to the prisoners of this music that made an impact on him and his world, and giving this gift to people that probably have never heard of any of this. And I love that scene. I love it. It's such a beautiful scene and so well shot. It's my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah. That is powerful when the camera's almost like that drone, a droney.
Yeah.
And they're all just standing there.
Yeah. Staring up at the sky.
Staring at the sky.
And he says, we almost felt like free men.
Yeah.
That music made them feel free. And there's a couple scenes like when they're having beer on the roof, tarring the roof, and they felt like free men. That was another scene, but that scene where they all felt like free men for just that moment when the music was playing was a powerful, very cool scene. Well shot, really well shot.
And somehow, even though it's a bunch of middle-aged dudes, young people can find value in it. I'm sure Carla could see it and relate. Here I can do this with my friends, and there's that just global themes in any country, right? I mean, it's a Hollywood movie, but everyone, it's got something for everyone. And I think that as you look at the top 10 movies of all time, obviously with a major slant on Hollywood, it does connect a lot a
yeah. It's a freaking prison movie. I mean, like, it's filmed it was filmed in this in Mansfield, Ohio. I don't know if you know, it filmed in an old prison in Mansfield that was actually shut down. And then they went and shot. And I mean, it's a fucking horrible looking place. and I mean, in terms of like costuming, there's no costuming. They're all wearing, prison uniforms. Well, it's a film that doesn't have a lot of glitz and glamour. There's no great music. There's no special effects. And I guess that just kind of odes to that. That's a sort of a nod to the power of the story and the acting and the way the film was shot that makes it so good, because it didn't need any of that. It didn't need those kinds of things. It was this movie that was shot about a very bleak place, in a very bleak place with these very bleak people wearing these awful clothes. But yet, it brought all these great qualities out of it. So that's really how great of a film it was.
Yeah, I do like the fact that there wasn't a sequel. If you think about the greatest movies of all, Godfather 2, right? But then there's Godfather 3, and that a little bit dilutes it. right? And I mean, we talked about sequels, and it's hard, when you even look at Lord of the Rings, and there's so many. There was the prequels.
I think the only ones I can really give every film is awesome is the Police Academy films, right? All 34 Police Academy movies.
And Titanic with Cal's Revenge, the one that did come out.
Cal's Revenge. Yeah, that one. But this one, no matter how much you may have wanted to see Andy go into the cartel, I'm so glad it didn't, because this film, this is kind of like, having a sequel to Casablanca. It's like, no, you don't want a sequel to Casablanca. You don't want a sequel to the Jaws sequel. This one, although Jaws, I would argue sequels to. But I have an issue with that. That's a whole nother episode. But with this film, no, there's no sequel. It beautiful ending. That's it.
Well, listen, everyone. First of all, I want to apologize in advance for the camera shots here. It looks like you're looking up at me. John, you're set. Me, it's a very odd. It's our first one. I was trying to figure out the gallery versus so the first 15 minutes may just be John, and I'm a small box. So everyone, give us a pass. We're going to get better at this.
We'll get better at it. We have no special lighting. We have no LEDs.
We're just happy we figured it out, right? So you're talking almost like 49, 50-year-old, like that's pretty big. So give us some credit.
Right on.
But listen, everyone, thank you so much. Again, let us know your feedback, even on the video, and just feel free to hate away. We can take it. I may cry, and this may be the last episode here.
We'll have to watch Shawshank Redemption, and we'll feel better.
I want to be in Zihuatanejo. Just tell me about the beach. All right, everyone. Well, listen, hey, have a great night, and we'll see you next week. See you guys.
See you.